Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here in just a second. All right, welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Marketplace Trends and Regulatory Updates webinar session. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Rainbird, Hunter, Ewing, and Brightview for helping make this event possible. Some housekeeping notes before we get started. I have muted everyone by default, so we won't be disrupted by latecomers. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the presentation unless you have questions or comments for our speakers, as this will help minimize any background noise throughout the presentation. During the presentation, if you have questions, you can ask verbally, which is the preference, or you can use the chat box if you prefer. I will be monitoring that the entire time, and we'll relay those questions or comments you have through the chat box to our speakers as well. Without further ado, please welcome Warren Gorwitz and John Farner.
Thank you, Nicole. Hi, John.
Hey.
Hello, everybody. So this is a PowerPoint free zone today in this discussion. So there is no presentation where John and I are going to have a discussion about, and we're hoping to make, we'd love you to be involved in this discussion as well. And so feel free to chime in with questions, thoughts. We're going to talk about, what's going on in our industry as it relates to marketplace trends and also regulatory things that are happening as well. We think, we've talked about this. Brent and I did a panel discussion or a presentation last year at the Faculty Academy, and we got a lot of great feedback, and we feel like the more information we can share with everybody on what's going on in our industry is applicable, that you can share with your students and just kind of be aware of all the things that are happening and how they're affecting us. And so yeah, so there's no PowerPoint. I hate to disappoint you, since I know you're all just dying to sit and watch a presentation again right now, but instead you get John and I. It's kind of like it'll be a variety show.
Warren, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are?
Sure. Yeah, I should probably do that. My name is Warren Gorwitz.
I mean, your name precedes yourself, and your reputation. So I just want to make sure that you, for those people who may not know you.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
My name is Warren Gorwitz, and I'm the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at Hunter Industries, and I was President of the Irrigation Association in 2018, and been active on a variety of different committees over my almost 28 years in the irrigation industry.
Good. Hello, everyone. My name is John Farner. I am the Global Chief Sustainability Officer for Netafim. We are primarily an ag and turf and landscape drip irrigation manufacturer. Netafim USA, you may have heard of, is our USA subsidiary here in the United States. I joined Netafim about a month ago. Before that, I was with the Irrigation Association. I was their industry development director. For that, I was their government public affairs director. And I was with the Irrigation Association for nearly 13 years, overseeing a lot of our strategic initiatives, primarily including the advocacy realm, focusing in on government relations, standards, codes development, and public affairs.
Great. So let's start our conversation. The pandemic's over, right? Well, not really, but it's had a significant impact on the industry. And John, you were really involved from the beginning in your Irrigation Association when you had your IA hat on, and responsibilities. You had a lot of involvement in kind of trying to figure out how to help our industry deal with how we were going to react to what was going on with the pandemic, especially in the early days when everything was shutting down, and there was this whole discussion around like essential businesses. And you want to share any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and I think as Warren and I talked about the topics to discuss with all of you today, we would be remiss talking about market and regulatory trends without at least mentioning the pandemic and the subsequent economic impact that occurred immediately after the pandemic. So we're talking about March of 2020 through now. So talk about your ups and downs in the world. What I will say is when we entered into late February, early March of 2020, we started, at least those of us on the regulatory side and government relations side, started hearing chatter about the potential of having some sort of pandemic-related response here in the United States. some quarantines maybe last a couple of weeks to knock out any hot spots that have occurred in the United States. We weren't really sure yet. When we got into the mid-March timeframe, so March 10th, 11th, and 12th, we'd already seen some pockets pop up in Washington State, as well as California, and some other pandemic, coronavirus cases on the East Coast. And this is when we really started hearing some of the pandemic-related responses, quarantine, mandatory stay-at-home orders happening in certain cities throughout the United States. Then came the, okay, everyone's going home. States started declaring mandatory stay-at-home orders. Each state had a different way of going about doing this. Each state had a different way of determining who needed to stay at home, who was a quote unquote essential business. So really within a span of 5 business days, we were looking at different announcements, different quarantines, different stay-at-home orders in not only 50, but hundreds of localities, including states throughout the United States. Now, what did this mean for landscape irrigation? Well, ag irrigation was just fine. Okay, so let's focus on landscape irrigation. In my role at the Irrigation Association, even though, as you know, we're pretty diverse and had landscape and ag associated with the association, my focus and the staff's focus at the Irrigation Association was primarily geared towards landscape irrigation because that was treated differently throughout the United States. I mean, there were times during that week where I literally thought our industry was going to crumble before my eyes. Manufacturers started having furloughs. Manufacturers and distributors started having layoffs, a lot of restructuring. This all occurred within a 2 to 3 week period. And this is all in the spring months, which this pandemic could not have happened at a worse time for our industry when we were just getting ready for the summer landscape period. So March, April, and May were very difficult for our industry, very difficult. There were states where we would have contractors being pulled over on the side of the road, being told to go home because they couldn't get to work. Now, that was the immediate. There were a lot of conversations of working directly with states, and our industry was very resilient and very impactful in addressing and responding to these sanctions. And then you had the federal government as well release their list of critical infrastructure and essential businesses. The landscape industry worked together to have landscaping included in the essential business category, critical infrastructure category at the Department of Homeland Security. And side note, the agency within the Department of Homeland Security is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration, CISA. You remember them from such episodes as Election 2020 and all that happened with election security, same agency. So they had a busy 2020, let me tell you. Anyway, so fast forward into the summer months, into the fall, our economy turned straight around and impacted our industry so much towards the positive, where we not only came out ahead after the pandemic, we were having the opposite problem with keeping up with demand. Manufacturers were having a tough time not only sourcing materials for manufacturing and getting materials from overseas to use in manufacturing in the United States or get component parts in the United States. We were in problems just meeting demand as it was in a normal year because demand had just gone up so much. And a good anecdotal evidence of this is look at your local Home Depot, Lowe's, or garden center throughout the summer months and see how crowded it was, pandemic or not. And the landscape industry was affected by all of this, and it continues today. So, Warren, sorry for that long kind of story there, but I just want to paint the picture a little bit of where we were a year ago, more than a year ago in March of 2020, to where we are now and where we are going in the future, which we're going to talk about as well, and how the pandemic really affected that.
And I want to throw a couple of things in there to kind of piggyback off what you said. And I think one of the things that impressed me the most about our entire industry was how everybody worked together, especially when they were working, many associations were working together to figure out how to make sure that we were considered essential businesses. And I think that in times of crisis or challenges, it's great to see that everybody pulled together. The other thing I want to say is, and I've said this to a couple other organizations that I work with, if there wasn't a time to show the value of an industry association and the work and the power that they have and the efforts that go into, allowing people to stay in business, that was certainly the time. And I hope that the Irrigation Association members saw that. I know that as a member, as a company member, we saw it, but I know in just talking with other people, contractors, nobody could have done that on their own. I mean, it took that was a huge value for associations, and I think that is something positive that we saw come out of that whole experience. I think. Yeah.
Warren, I'll chime in real quick as well, because I'm not sure we're going to talk about this, and I think we are, but I think it's a good segue in talking about the pandemic and the effects on the industry and marketplace that the pandemic has brought to the table. We are exiting the pandemic. Let's face it. When California opened back up 2 days ago, essentially, we are coming out of this pandemic. We're going to see all of the restriction ease. I know I'm based in Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. Our state is out of a state of emergency on July 1st. No mandates, nothing for anything, okay, moving forward. So we're easing out of this. However, consumer, like what they do, the decisions they make as far as, where to invest money, that has changed. And there's going to be some things that will continue to change, not just, using the Target app to have them delivered to your car. Like that stuff will continue, right? In addition to that is the value of the outside space. People have been outside more during the pandemic than ever before. People were looking to eat more outside. We're looking to gather more outside because it was deemed safer given the virus that we were trying to combat during the pandemic. Well, what we do as an irrigation industry is we provide those outdoor spaces in a safe manner using water efficiently. So as people looked at investing in their homes, like I said, the Home Depot, Lowe's, garden centers, they're looking to invest in the irrigation as well to enhance their outdoor living space. And that will continue. We're seeing right now in the marketplace that investment will continue for the foreseeable future, regardless of what will happen in the pandemic or not, because of just people's experience and how much they enjoyed gathering in their outdoor spaces, no matter where they were.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point for the instructors to make sure that you're sharing that perspective with your students too, because it elevated our industry significantly. And to John's point, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, I think this is, yeah, I think at the same time, the other interesting thing that kind of was brought to the top was this focus and consciousness of natural resources as well. Even from the positive effects that shutdowns had on the environment for a while, people are thinking more about that. It's on top of more people's minds. And so I think that all ties in really nicely with what we do every day, what our industry does every day, and the importance of it.
Agreed.
What else can we talk about as it relates to market trends? I'm looking at my list of topics here that I had. I think the other thing that has emerged, well, I mean, now we're talking more about the regulatory stuff too, but it kind of ties in as well. I mean, we're in the midst of another significant drought on the West Coast again. Just a matter of time. It'll happen again after this time as well. But I think there definitely is a continued focus on water conservation for sure. And to the point, because last year, correct me if I'm wrong, but last year in California is when, well, not just in California, I mean, how many states had pressure regulation requirements for sprinkler heads enacted in 2020? I mean, that was, how many, John? I'm drawing a blank on that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have it in front of me, but it's probably around like 7 to 10.
7 to 10, and there's more on the books potentially for this year.
Yeah, there are states addressing this. I want to go to the drought real quick first, Warren, and talk a bit about that, because when it comes to market trends and the way the market is going relating to drought, and we'll talk about climate change here for a second. Our industry is impacted, sometimes in a positive and sometimes in a negative way. Our regulations are reactionary. Okay, so we can't go out as an industry or as a country or students or whomever and say, you know what, this is coming on the horizon. I want a piece of legislation to combat this thing that hasn't happened yet. That rarely, if ever, happens. On a state level, national level, rarely. We are reactionary. And I'll use this as an example because it's one we all know is in the days immediately after September 11th, we reacted in a way. We have a whole new agency. Department of Homeland Security was created after September 11th. We had to start taking off our shoes at the airport because of September 11th and subsequent, other kind of, challenges or threats against the United States because of that. So very reactionary society. The same thing is with drought, natural resources, and irrigation and water use. So in California specifically, we have things like AB 1881 that dictates how the landscape is designed, the type of irrigation you can use. The very last drought, groundwater, is finally regulated in California as well, specifically on the agricultural side. So in this current drought, we have all these different regulations that have already occurred in California, specifically on recent droughts. So this one, it really remains to be seen what new or different permanent regulations are in place, in addition to the temporary restrictions that are put in place without California. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because this era of students, more than anybody else, I graduated college in 2000, and this was not on my radar when I was in college, is an environmental focus on climate change, being very aware of the impact that our actions as members of society, corporations have on the environment. So students that have already invested time and interest in irrigation are very aware on the environmental impacts that irrigation brings to the table, and specifically efficient irrigation. They've already valued the landscape plant material. Now they're valuing the efficient use of natural resources as well. So as Warren said, as our society catches up and starts thinking of more environmental focus and the impacts of climate change, we're seeing more and more focus put on the type of technologies that are put in the landscape. No longer is it just in the irrigation system. It's okay, let's look at the control. Is it a smart controller? Let's look at the sensors. You have a rain sensor, soil moisture sensor. Do you have drip irrigation? Do you have micro irrigation? What type of sprinklers do you use? Are they MP rotators? Are they pressure regulating? All these questions are being put into place right now. And then because of that, we're seeing the regulations come online as well, which is what Warren just brought up regarding the pressure regulating spray sprinklers. Did you have any thoughts on that, Warren, at all?
Well, thinking about like the temporary measures, I mean, we're already seeing it here in California, and especially up in Northern California, where the drought seems to be having the biggest impact from a water supply standpoint. Earlier this week, one of the cities, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on the city name right now, but one of the cities up in the Bay Area actually just basically banned outdoor irrigation. No new landscapes are allowed to be installed now. Residences are on a 75 gallon per person per day water budget. That's per person per day, which is, depending on how your lifestyle is, that should be pretty doable, hopefully. But from an industry standpoint, I think the thing that I'm most concerned about, and actually that same city stopped issuing building permits as well. I mean, this will have an impact on the industry. Hopefully it's only a short-term impact, but nobody knows when our water supply will be replenished. I mean, nobody can predict that. I mean, if you could, then you'd have a great career. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that just puts a significant emphasis and a highlight on how important it is that we use water resources and making sure that we're doing everything we can, best practices, and using the technologies you brought up. I think that's something that I think we're going to see highlighted again and again. And some of the states are having reactionary measures to that as well. If you saw recently in the news that Las Vegas now by 2027, I believe it is 26, 27, non-functional turf grass will no longer be allowed outside of residential applications. You can still have it. Well, as it is, you can't have turf grass in your front yard in a residential application, but there'll be no more non-functional turf grass in commercial and public areas aside from parks. And so they're taking a significant look at that. And I think the other thing that this drought's going to push hard is turf grass removal. And the same cycle we went through the last time we had the drought in California, and hopefully it'll be done in a smarter way. But I hope that there's people looking at the impacts, better measuring the impacts that that has on the entire landscapes. And hopefully during this drought, we don't ignore our trees that, that are a significant financial investment in a landscape and provide such a significant benefit to the environment, as turfgrass does too when it's properly managed. So I'm on my soapbox on these things because it's just, it's this cycle we see again. And I'm afraid we're going to see the same cycle about water, water use going down. So water rates are going to go up from the water agencies because they need to continue to make sure they're getting their revenue. But I mean, I'm hoping that we've learned something from the last drought in California specifically, and that we do things a little smarter this time. But that remains to be seen, and it's really up to us as an industry to respond to that.
Let's talk about plant material real quick, Warren, too, because this isn't always about just irrigation and the technologies used for irrigation. Plant material, I joined Irrigation Association in 2008, and I think in the mid 2000s, even before that, there was building interest in focusing on right plant, right place. And again, we're looking at market trends and regulations during this session here and what drives the market for irrigation. So we've always, in the irrigation industry, said that we have the technologies to apply water efficiently no matter what plant you're growing. Okay. And I always had a saying at the Irrigation Association, I don't care what you're growing. I really don't. I'll irrigate efficiently. Right? Trees, shrubs, grass, wherever you are in the United States, we have the technologies that can irrigate that efficiently. Okay. Regulators in different areas of the United States are looking really at the plant material. So we're seeing in California, AB 1881, looking at low, medium, high water use plant material, right? But then you look at states like Maryland, out here on the East Coast in Chesapeake Bay watershed, where there are some areas that look at limiting grass. And that's not always driven by water use. It could be driven by chemical use. It could be driven by carbon with lawnmowers and lawn equipment. There are other factors at play here that go into what type of plants are installed throughout the United States. Sometimes it's about water, and sometimes it's blamed on water. Other times it's a whole host of reasons that go, like I said, fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides, water, noise, carbon. It's a whole suite of reasons why. But it's something that we as an industry really need to get a grasp on, is this right plant, right place. And our industry, we are looked upon more and more to be the experts on everything, to be the experts on the plants, to be experts on the science behind the design of the irrigation system, to be engineers, water management engineers, quite frankly, looking at the point of connection to the application of the water to the plant material and everything else in between. So our industry is becoming more and more sophisticated because of the demands in the marketplace. Because of that, and water is a driving reason, but again, it's that plant palette, the plant material itself is really being looked at by markets, by regulators, by agencies, localities, municipalities throughout the United States. I know, Warren, you've probably seen that at Hunter as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I guess my question to you is, what do we do as an industry to make sure that we're providing that right information?
I think we lean into it and embrace it and don't stay in our silo.
Because it seems like a lot of times we do get in our silo and we beat our chests and complain about it, and we fight it, and
it's not me. I'm the water expert, but more and more people are looking at the irrigation professional to have knowledge about horticulture, to have knowledge about water management, to have knowledge about design, to have knowledge about contracting, a whole suite of reasons. And the worst thing we can do as the industry is say, I don't know, not my problem, talk to somebody else. Because quite frankly, I found myself in that position sometimes, being the voice of the irrigation industry, specifically relating to the plants themselves. When no one else had that expertise, nobody had the expertise of the plant palette, right plant, right place. Nobody was stepping up. And the irrigation industry said, well, we can irrigate efficiently, but it's not our expertise. We need to lean into it. We need to lean into it as an industry. We need to be seen as the experts. And if California is a great reason, California patted itself in the back in the early 10s during that drought by putting all of these restrictions into place, and with the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance and WELO, which number one, only applied to new landscapes, no retrofits, only new landscapes. So the immediate drought wasn't affected at all. This drought might be because and we have landscapes that were installed, right? That's one. Two, the big book was about plant palette. The small book was about irrigation. So tell me where we have the biggest opportunity here as experts in water use. It's on that plant palette horticulture side. And I think we need to lean into it. I really do, because we are the experts at irrigating plants. So that knowledge is going to be essential moving forward.
I think the challenge sometimes is, depending on where you are in the country, you don't have a say in that. You don't have input in that, because in a lot of cases, not as much here on, I would say, on the West Coast, but in a lot of areas, there's somebody else doing the landscape design, and you're just coming in and putting the irrigation system in. And so you kind of get,
and that's fine.
Oh, here's what I have to irrigate. And obviously we're going to do it as efficiently as possible. But I think if there's a way to make sure that there's some, again, not operating in silos, that there's some collaboration, so that things are getting designed to be appropriate for the environment that they're in, and then obviously they're irrigated.
But when irrigation is seen as the bad guy based on the plant palette, who's at fault? You.
Yeah.
Hunter. Not even Hunter. I kid. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think the irrigation industry as a whole, the manufacturers, I think the technology's there, the products are there to do it as efficiently as possible. But I think the thing that, especially when we look at some of these regulations and some of the programs, is that we always have to remember this is an irrigation system, and there's a lot of components that go into the system. And so it's and without a good design, without good installation, without proper maintenance, all these best products that we can manufacture, they only can do as good of a job as how they're used. And so I think that's the thing that, as I know, we as a manufacturer, and I would say a lot of our industry is focusing so much on that training side and the education side to make sure that the people that are using the products on a daily basis, the people that are installing them, understand how they work properly and how to install them properly. And that's why, a lot of the training programs that the IA has put together are so important as well.
You want to talk about, so we're moving into kind of a regulation side there, and I don't really want to talk about pressure regulating until we kind of talk about WaterSense, Warren.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about WaterSense a little bit.
So do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, what's been going on with WaterSense recently, specifically? Go for it. I'm trying to.
I can start, and then
you want to start?
I can start and throw it off to you real quick. So I don't, this is my first faculty academy. I was on staff for 13 years, and I've never sat in a faculty academy because Jeanine and Nicole never invited me. But I like to get kind of an overview of WaterSense. Number one, I'm assuming everyone here knows what it is.
Good point.
But just in case, WaterSense was formed. It's a program within the Environmental Protection Agency. I call it the Energy Star for water. And they may not like me calling that, but that's fine. It's what it is. It's a voluntary labeling program within the EPA focused on water use efficiency. So they look at different kind of products and technologies. If you walk into Home Depot or Lowe's, you can buy a toilet, shower head, or faucet with a WaterSense logo on it. Thank you, Warren, for sending that in the chat. There's a link in the chat now for more about WaterSense. And on the irrigation side, right now we have weather-based irrigation controllers. They started easy. They started weather-based irrigation controller, a brand new technology in the market in the late aughts, and they started with that. So they have weather-based irrigation controllers. They have pressure regulating spray sprinklers. They now have soil and moisture sensors,
which took 10 years to get a label on that one.
Which is brand new. That's right.
Yeah, brand new.
Which is brand new. But then also certifications. So the IA certifications, COIL certifications, different regional certifications throughout the United States. They also label those. So individuals that hold those certifications can market themselves as holding a certification that is recognized by WaterSense. WaterSense is a voluntary program. Nobody is telling Hunter Industries, you must participate in WaterSense, okay? At least the federal government is not, the program is not. But it's a choice that manufacturers can make to go through the testing process, testing protocols to have their products labeled with a WaterSense label. Now, real quick, in addition to new products and certifications, they also have a new homes program where, like Energy Star, if I build a new home, there's an option to have it be Energy Star labeled. Well, WaterSense has theirs as well. The unfortunate part is the new homes program was rolled out in 2009. Now, if we all think back to 2009 in our economy, that was the popping noise you heard was the housing bubble bursting. Okay, so the housing market crumbled, and not only were there no WaterSense homes being built, there were no homes being built. So it wasn't really a great time for that program to be rolled out. Given the housing market now, they've re-rolled out that program. They've breathed some energy into it. So you may see some new homes being put in the market with the WaterSense label on it now. They've given some options to make it more regionalized, not a cookie cutter, one size fits all. Anyway, it looks at inside and outside in the landscape water use as well. So did I miss anything, Warren, on WaterSense?
No, I think you covered most of it. I was going to say that, or if you're going to talk about how this voluntary program is being turned into.
Yeah, and so I'm going to do that and throw it up to Warren to talk a bit about pressure regulating sprinklers. So when I said that it's a voluntary program, which means nobody is telling Hunter Industries or any Rainbird, whomever at Toro, you must get your controllers, you must get your products labeled by this program. Now, we are a federalist society. States make their own laws, and we as an industry are regulated on a state-by-state basis. There's some federal laws and programs out there that regulate the irrigation industry. Not many. There really aren't. We are primarily regulated at the state level and the municipal level. So cities, I'll never forget, early in my tenure at the IA, I got a phone call, forget from who, asking me why I wasn't at the Santa Monica, it might have been you, Warren. Why wasn't I? Yeah, no, I don't think it was. Why wasn't I at the Santa Monica meeting that occurred in the middle of the night one night when they decided to ban sprinkler irrigation? And I said, what? Like, I'm in Washington, D.C. I had no idea this was even occurring. Like, I don't know. So we are regulated even at the city and county level in some instances when it comes to irrigation. Now, when states come in and regulate different products, how water is used, they can make their own decisions. And one of those decisions is really looking at different standards and mandating different standards be followed. So, for instance, in a state, we follow the plumbing code, we follow a fire code, we follow, whatever kind of building codes there are, those are mandated by state law. Okay, those are developed elsewhere. The state law says, I choose that one. We may change it a little bit, but I'm going to mandate it in my state. Okay, and we'll go into that in a second as well, regarding codes. But look at the different programs, the different technologies we have with WaterSense. So you have weather-based irrigation controllers, you have soil moisture controllers, and now you also have pressure regulating spray sprinklers. And so when a state government says, wow, we want to do more with water conservation, let's look at the WaterSense list. Oh, wow, pressure regulating spray sprinklers, those look good. I'm going to mandate those. And you have a third party coming in that doesn't really do anything with irrigation, says, that's a great idea. There's no standard, but there's this voluntary WaterSense program. Let's mandate that. And that's what we have right now. Yeah. So there are a handful of states out there where, and I can have Janine and Nicole email you out the list of states that we have, or contact the Irrigation Association, because the person who took my job is now following this too, that has an up-to-date list of the different states that are now mandating that any sprinkler sold in that state be pressure regulating. And that's the situation we're in right now, is that these states are being very prescriptive in the technologies that are not only being used, but being sold in the state regarding landscape irrigation. No matter golf and ag are exempt, but commercial and residential are not exempt from these mandates.
Yeah, I had to replace a sprinkler head at my house and on a weekend, and I needed to get something quickly. So I went to my local Home Depot and wait, I don't need pressure regulation at my house, but I didn't have a choice. I had to buy a sprinkler with a pressure regulator in it. Yeah, I mean, it makes it challenging, obviously, because of enforcement and whether state or how. And I haven't really heard a lot about California and how they're enforcing that yet. But I know that as a manufacturer, we ship the products to distributors, and it's out of our control where it gets sold, and whether other distributors decide to cross ship stuff in from another state because somebody says I don't want those pressure regulated sprinklers or not. Spending from my years working at a distributor part in my career, but I think it bodes some interesting challenges. And I think you bring up the codes and standards part as well, and that's another thing that is continuing to impact, especially on the development side and the commercial side of the industry, for these various other organizations that have no irrigation background and experience, requiring the use of certain products, or even just talking about the kinds of water we can use in a landscape, or can we even use water long term in a landscape, as far as like with some of the programs
And can
like
you use potable water? I mean,
can you use potable water, LEED, the LEED program, or International Living Futures Challenge, and their whole building thing, and what materials can you use on an irrigation system, where PVC and certain plastics are not allowed to be used if you want to get this particular certification for a project. And so it's a lot of, I don't think it's not something that people think about on a day-to-day basis in our industry, but it's continuing to, and I think it's going to continue to, and I mean, let's talk about the realities of the landscape of the irrigation industry. Our products are made out of plastic for the most part, and we talk about the challenges that we've seen this year with the supply chain because of some environmental issues that happened, weather that impacted, I would say, the entire irrigation industry as far as being able to get raw materials to produce products. And I mean, these are things that that continue to rear their ugly head.
Yeah, so let's translate this to the market real quick, and kind of where we've been and where we're going, in my opinion, which is based on experience regarding standards and codes as relates to the irrigation industry. If we think back to the mid-aughts, 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, irrigation, landscape irrigation was the Wild West. Really anything went throughout the United States. There were some areas that were regulated. There were some. For the most part, we were not. And so our contractors and our distributors were really used to making their own decisions on what worked, what didn't, and contractors and distributors and manufacturers built their own reputations on what was more efficient, what the value proposition of their technologies were in the marketplace, defining that efficiency and what that meant. And so it wasn't really regulated at all, voluntary, mandatory, state by states, by codes, by anything. In the early 2010s, green construction codes, and LEED, it's to somewhat too, but green construction codes started becoming more and more of a thing. And when they developed that, they said to themselves, wow, we've been really focusing on plumbing and inside, buildings and structures, looking at energy, looking at water. Let's look outside. Let's look at the landscape too. And so then they said, there's no standards at all on any of these products. This is just, again, like nothing is regulated whatsoever. Let's look at developing standards, because we want to further look at code officials determining what's appropriate and what's not in terms of outdoor water use. And that's what drove these codes now looking at outdoor water use. And really, I mean, the decision was made not by the people that said, okay, let's look at developing standards and let's look at developing codes. It was driven by the market saying, hey, I want these green construction codes. This is why LEED does such a great job with marketing. I mean, they're a non-governmental agency. They're a voluntary agency, but when people see LEED, they think it's a government run, right? They're not, they're voluntary. But the market is going to, hey, we want to be more sustainable. So you look at commercial buildings, you look at these big structures that are out there and said, how can we become more sustainable? And we want to be recognized to be sustainable too. We want something out of this. And so how do we do that? And that's where the green construction codes came in. And that's when Warren, you did a good job laying this out, looking at, where does the water come from? Is it potable water from the municipal water supply? Do you have your own groundwater rights? Are you getting it from an alternative water source? Do you have rain catchment? Where are you getting your irrigation water from? Okay, let's look at that first. And then we're going to look at how is that used? What is your irrigation design? How often is it, and or how often is it audited? What are the sprinklers? Are you using water sense technologies? Do you have a weather-based irrigation controller, or a soil moisture-based irrigation controller, sensor-based irrigation controller? What is your pressure at the whole system? Do you have a flow rate? What are all, so it's looking at all these different things, right? But it's all being driven, well, it's being driven by money, but that's being driven by how sustainable are we as, a building, as an owner, as an entity, and looking at these energy and water savings. And because of the amount of water that's used outdoors, the market's being driven that way to drive efficiencies and, quite frankly, conservation due to the efficiencies out of these programs. And as Warren said, that's going to continue to grow. This isn't shrinking, this is growing. And we as an industry were hesitant at first. We're like, I'm not really sure. But again, if we do this smart, we can use this to our advantage, right? We need to say, hey, the more efficient you are, the more points you get. Of course, there'll be hurdles. There's some instances you get 0 points with no irrigation, but we really need to look at encouraging these entities and, quite frankly, the industry to embrace this model, to look at opportunities to promote the green material that we grow out of the ground, trees, grass, shrubs, whatever it is, and look at carbon catchment and carbon mitigation due to this green plant material and the role efficient irrigation plays in all of this. But this is becoming more and more of a thing as we continue to evolve as an industry.
Yeah, what do you think about the whole green infrastructure? And now we've got infrastructure funding coming,
Do we know?
Well, or we might have funding coming.
Yeah.
That's a whole political discussion, probably more than anything else.
Here are my thoughts on this. Yeah, so here are my thoughts on this. So I don't want to get into politics behind infrastructure funding and everything else, but I want to talk about green infrastructure and the role irrigation plays here.
Because we
Again, let's step outside of our
play
silo.
a big role in that, don't you think?
Huge.
Yeah.
But we need to step out of our silo too. This is all about the story of water. Let's look at the lens of water. So we need to look at this from a full infrastructure perspective and the role irrigation and living plant material play in our stormwater management, our drainage, our green spaces, any kind of green infrastructure that's out there, the role that irrigation plays. And I think there are a lot of opportunities here, and we as an industry have not done a great job at getting involved in this. And some of that is on me, quite frankly, when I was at the Irrigation Association, and just some hesitancy with understanding the role that our industry plays. But there are ample opportunities out there looking at the role that irrigation plays from the position of, you look at green infrastructure in stormwater management. And so a living, healthy, breathing plant and healthy soil's key, healthy soil plays in stormwater management, right? So that's one. Another is looking at the ecosystem services of living, breathing plant material. Again, trees, shrubs, and grass, and the role they play in carbon mitigation and oxygen creation, all these things that we learn in third grade science with photosynthesis, right? And then three, I'll go back to soils because that is so important, the role that efficient irrigation plays with promoting healthy soils. Because we're looking at carbon sequestration and carbon storage, that happens in the soil. So you, number one, need a plant to be living in order for any of this to happen. And two, you need to ensure that you're not washing that soil away with any kind of inefficient irrigation. It needs to be efficient in order for those soils to remain healthy. So those are the opportunities we have as an industry and as a market to encourage this efficient irrigation concept when it comes to green infrastructure and any kind of resilient city or investment cities are going to make in their infrastructure when it comes to water use and irrigation. I don't know, Warren, what do you think?
I would also add in there green roofs and green walls, another part of green infrastructure. That efficient irrigation is so important for thriving. Another thing that kind of ties in with that a little bit, a trend that we didn't talk about yet, that I didn't even have on my list, but it just came to my mind as you were talking, is this whole urban agriculture component as well. And this whole community agriculture piece and how people are migrating back to growing their own food again, and how there's an irrigation plays a significant role in that as well. And so, I mean, I think these are opportunities for our industry and for the students as they come out into the industry to play a part in that as well. So it's I think as an industry we've come a long way as far as our sophistication and what we impact. We've always impacted it, but we just have to tell our story better, and how we impact it in the positive way we do too, and be mindful of the negative way as well.
I didn't mention this, but coming out of the pandemic on the agricultural side, the landscape side, people embraced outdoor living spaces. On the agricultural side, people started looking more and more about where and how their food is grown.
Yeah.
And where it came from in the whole supply chain and the disruption of the supply chain that occurred. It wasn't just toilet paper, it was everything, right? It wasn't just, raw materials, toilet paper. Toilet paper wasn't a shortage, it was a disruption of the supply chain. We needed to get, people were spending time elsewhere. So we weren't going to offices. And so everything was shipped to offices needed to be shipped through other distribution chains to grocery stores and Targets and Walmarts. That's where it needed to go. There wasn't a shortage of actual paper. So that with food, it was the same way. A significant amount, I want to say 60%, don't quote me on that, but it's a good amount. It's more north of 50 of fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables are consumed outside of the home, restaurants, hotels, recreation areas, things like that, right? So all of a sudden people needed more fruits and vegetables at their home because they weren't going to restaurants and they weren't going to hotels, they weren't traveling. That's a supply chain disruption. So people started becoming very aware of this and looking at how their food is grown, where it's coming from. And so as an irrigation industry, specifically looking at urban agriculture, more and more cities and states are investing in looking at developing urban agriculture, incentivizing urban agriculture, whether it's your own garden at your house, right? Or if it's a community area, a communal area, Netafim was founded on a kibbutz in Israel. So something like that, where you have a community with a farm around, surrounding it. That's the kind of concept we're looking at here. I wouldn't say that the marketplace is disrupted right now by it, but it's a trend we're looking at, and it's growing.
I would agree. I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, we wanted a lively discussion and input from the audience, and John and I have been talking for 47 minutes. And our time is going to be up here pretty soon. So does anybody have any questions, thoughts about things we're talking about, the relevancy to what, to how you can apply this information with your students?
Or anything we didn't touch upon, you want to touch upon?
Yeah, is there anything that we didn't cover as well? I mean, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in if you'd like to.
Go ahead, Greg.
Well, let me ask you this. Your first talking point was talking about the trends of the pandemic and the way that we came out of it and the way that we worked through it. One question that I have for educators is, in that time, in that year that we were in the pandemic, web-based communication like virtual Teams, Zoom, all those things developed. From what I understand, what I was told, was about 11 years of development happened in 1 year because of the pandemic. How do you think that that's going to affect the way that we educate students and irrigation professionals moving forward in the industry? Is it going to be a major part, or is this just a phase right now?
Warren, you can start. I have some thoughts, but go ahead. You can start if you want.
He wasn't asking us. He was asking the educators, I think. Right, Greg?
Oh, okay. I have some thoughts. Hey, I'll talk all day long. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
I want to hear your guys' thoughts too, but yeah, input from the
instructors
as well.
There was a good discussion about this yesterday too on one of the other sessions. Go ahead, Lindsay.
All right. Well, I'm from Bakersfield College and in California. I'm also the director of education for the California Landscape Contractors Association. But the biggest impact that we've seen is that going online was extremely difficult. Getting everything prepared from face-to-face to interactive was very difficult, especially because this industry is so hands-on. And so using YouTube and all of the other devices and recording our presentations, etc., was really the biggest challenge. But I think the big difference that we're seeing now is that even today our school is open, but the students are still gun shy. They don't want to come back into the classroom as much, not yet, because they're unsure about what's going on, and especially here in California, it's still questionable. But when we look at what the future is going to hold, we are probably going to see more hybrid classes going on, and this is probably going to change a lot with the way that schools are even structured for the future, because with the lack of students in the lecture halls, we may actually see that we may not have as much infrastructure required to have these huge campuses. Bakersfield College, we generally have around 30,000 students, and here we're going to be looking at quite a bit less. And when you look at how many students are going to be coming onto campus, it's going to be about 20,000 students that are going to be visiting our campus. And so we're not going to be seeing the need for a lot of these challenges, but to get them to do that hands-on, I think that's going to be our biggest drawback, is to get them really interacting with us.
Do you think that the technology allows for greater access? Because that's one thing I've seen in the last year, is especially like from an education standpoint, not the hands-on portion of irrigation, but being able to attend some of these virtual conferences that cost me very little, whereas before I would have had to flown there, hotel, all that stuff. Now I don't have the human interaction, especially if it's a conference with people that I know that are there. But as far as just allowing more people that maybe wouldn't have been able to have access from a schooling education standpoint, because now they can do it more conveniently from their home.
Oh, absolutely. I think our biggest factor that we have in our advantage is like the Hunter University, and Rainbird University, and all of these online educational recordings that you guys have put together. This has really made a significant impact on how we teach. And so, yeah, the biggest drawback, I think, with going virtual is we're not going to have that interaction, and we're going to start to see where students are not going to be able to interact with people. They're not going to know how to behave, and so we're going to have some issues.
No, not that you took a very negative viewpoint, Lindsay, because that's what you're experiencing now. But I have a very optimistic viewpoint on the world post-pandemic, and I think eventually we will get into a normal that looks a lot like the normal was before the pandemic. It may take some areas a little bit longer than others. California may be an example of, but in the southeast part of the United States, I mean, they were been normal for about a year now. So I think in many areas we're going to see that normal. Now, the challenge that we have as a society, not just educators, but society, is how do we not lose, Greg, you put it, the 10 years worth of technological advancements that we made, or at least introduced into the marketplace, like Zoom, Teams, and others, and use it to our advantage, because we don't want to do things exactly cookie cutter how they were before the pandemic. So we want to have that human interaction. We want to touch, look, feel the different components, and how they and plant material, and get our fingers dirty and things like that. But at the same time, Lindsay and Warren, you guys were just talking about it, embrace all the opportunities of technology and information that's out there at the tips of your fingers that wasn't accessible before the pandemic. So I think that as educators, you can use this as an opportunity and embrace the opportunities that were created out of the pandemic, while going back to this normal way of doing business and educating that we had before. And like I said, I'm optimistic that will happen. That's your profession, better than me. I think it's different experiences in different areas of the United States. But that's one suggestion I have is look at everything that's out there that's available to you now that wasn't before, and use it.
The technology is really going to be significant when you look at 3D imagery and using all of the technology that's around. We're going to see it in a lot of different places that we didn't see it in the past, and especially in irrigation. All these diagrams that we saw, we'll start to see where it's going to be 3D, and you're going to be able to turn it and move it around and see exactly how that system works on that backflow preventer. We're going to see all of these different technologies that are going to really expand out and show us what we have available to us. And I think we will get back to that abnormal kind of society for our future.
I think about during yesterday's educator or instruct how to teach panel. I forgot what it was called, but I remember Dr. Gowdy saying that he was shooting some video for an irrigation audit, and he was actually able to put some drone imagery in there, and actually you could actually see the audit from a totally different view that you wouldn't get, that we don't see when we're doing an audit on the ground. You don't have that perspective, and so I think there is a way to put the technology together to what you've both been saying. But I also think that it's important to know, and I talk about this a lot when I'm doing presentations, is that, the technology is not going to replace people in our industry. I certainly don't have a crystal ball, but AI will do some things to help us be smarter about things and maybe make some more automated decisions, but we still need practitioners, people out in the field and teaching irrigation. If I think about like the hands-on irrigation training that I had when I was at Cal Poly as a student, way back when in the dark ages, that, I couldn't have learned that through watching a video. I mean, it will help supplement my learning and it'll help get me to understand the concepts, but I got to go cut the pipe and do that stuff myself. That's, so I still think there's going to be an opportunity for that hands-on, and somehow we're going to have to figure out how to do that in a hybrid component, and taking advantage of the technology, to John's point.
3 minutes left. Anything else?
Any last minute questions, you guys? All right, if not, that wraps up our session for today. Thank you, Warren and John, for leading this great discussion on marketplace trends and regulatory updates. Our next session, Fundamentals of Electrical Troubleshooting, will begin at 4 p.m. Eastern. As a reminder, there is a separate Zoom link for that session. Thank you again, Warren and John, and a big thank you to our sponsors, Rainbird, Hunter, Ewing, and Brightview. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.